Well, guys, we started a series a few weeks ago called Face the Fear, and this one is just really all about that. It's about the reality that what followers of Jesus do is we square off with fear, and we're called to do that. Honestly, God moves us often into situations where we are put in places where we have to look at the thing that we're trying to avoid and kind of square off with that. And that has been true of the people of God kind of throughout all of time. God's people continually are called on to look into these situations and to grow in and through the squaring off and the facing of fear. And it's through that process we learn how to trust God. And it's often in the middle of that God's people are loved and God's name is glorified, is the word that the Bible uses. His name he looks good in his people when his people kind of face their fears for his name's sake. And we looked at this a few weeks ago. We started the series and began to set up shop around the story of David. And David is a guy who kind of in the ancient world, he would have been a shepherd. He was young. He was a poet. He's a warrior. He's eventually going to be a king. And David would be called upon by God to face a pretty incredibly fearful situation that most of us would kind of probably want to run away from. And what happened here's the scenario, if you're maybe just jumping in with us, here's the scenario. There's two nations at war with each other, and they come to this conclusion that basically says, hey, instead of all fighting against each other, why don't we each pick one guy, let them fight, whoever wins that fight, that winner is kind of the winner of the war, right? And kind of simplified the whole thing. It happened to benefit or the nation that came up with the idea, the Philistines, because they had this gigantic guy named Goliath who is an incredible warrior, and they know probably nobody's going to beat him. And he would have taunted the other nation and said, hey, can anybody fight me? Is anybody going to square off with me? Right here's kind of the call. And David watches this play out. He hears this. He's offended because God's people and God's name is defiled, is the word that he's kind of dragged through the mud. And he says, this is not cool, in essence. This is not good. I'm not going to stand for that. I'll go fight the guy. So David, this young guy, steps up to the plate, and we kind of pick up the story. This is what we said, is we kind of pick up the story in a kind of the mountaintop, right? Kind of the top of the mountain. And we said one of the things that happens along the way here is when we look at this kind of mountaintop moment where somebody squares off with their fears and they find victory in and through it, we wanted to look around those scenarios and we want to see David's perspective and kind of how he made decisions as he made his way into kind of victory and into the top of the mountain. So what we want to do today is we want to stare and look and draw some lessons from how David prepared at kind of at the very last moment as he's making his way into fighting Goliath. He had some decisions to make about if he was going to kind of trust how God made him or if he was going to do what made sense to everybody else, right, in essence. And so want to pick up where that story leaves off. And David is kind of getting prepared to go face Goliath. And he's got a guy named Saul with him. Saul is the king, right? He's the king of the nation, so he would have been a big deal. And Saul has a lot on the line too, because if David loses this battle, Saul loses his nation. He loses the war, right? So it's a big deal. He's got skin in the game. He wants to make sure David is set up for success because if he loses, then he loses, right? And so he's going to make some decisions and approach it in a really in a way that kind of makes sense. We'll unpack it here in 1 Samuel chapter 17. Here's what we're told. It says, then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. He said, I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I'm not used to them. So he took them off, and he took his staff in his hand. He chose 5 smooth stones from the stream. He put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine, right? So this is right before David's going to go square off with this warrior Goliath. And Saul's going to look at him and say, hey, man, like, take my armor, take all my stuff with you. That this is what I would use if I were you, and I'm going to kind of set you up to go into battle. David rejects all that, and he's like, this isn't me, this isn't natural to me, I've never used this before. Last week we talked about how David fought a lion and a bear, right, and beat them both, right? He's thinking in his mind, when I fought the lion and the bear, I didn't have this stuff on. I had my sling and my stones and this is what I know how to use to be used by God and to fight, right? Which is what David was being called to do to glorify God in the middle of this. Now, what I want us to do, though, is I want us to see there's some principles we can, I think, draw from this scenario that make a lot of sense. David, right, is going to be a guy, let's say this is David, and he's going to look and say, man, I know what God has gifted me with and the skills that he's put within me. I know how he's wired me. Saul is going to say, here's things that have worked in my scenario, in my situation. And I think Saul maybe was well-meaning. Maybe he was afraid. Who knows? We weren't totally told how that all plays out. But David is saying, I'm going to use what I've got, and I'm going to use what I've got to make God look good, right? The Bible is going to call this bringing glory to God, right? To bring glory to God. And the way that he was going to do that in this situation is to fight Goliath. That's kind of what was being asked of him in the moment. Saul's going to say, hey, man, but why don't you use the way that would make sense to me to bring glory to God? Why don't you take my way, my armor, and why don't you use that? And he's like, I can't do that. I've got to use the approach and the way that makes sense to me. And here's something I want us to pay attention to and to see. When we're thinking about facing off with the fears in our own lives, the giant battles that show up, what I want to do is I want to go with the tools that God has given me, right? Not the mold of someone else. Not the mold of someone else. A lot of times, well-meaning people in our lives are going to kind of try to squeeze us into the way that makes sense to them, often because it worked for them, right? It worked for them. And so they're going to look and say, hey, do this my way, approach it the way that I approached it, use what I have, and listen, there are times where that's going to be super helpful and appropriate. When we're talking about general wisdom, that's super helpful. General wisdom is helpful and available to everybody, right? We're not saying that we should throw that off. What we're looking at is saying when it comes to recognizing how God has made me, how God has gifted me, how he has looked and said, hey, I want you to walk in the uniqueness that you have. This person, I have made them, of course, unique as well, but to take somebody else's uniqueness and try to put it on my life and in my approach to glorifying God, it just doesn't always work. It doesn't always make sense, and often it kind of backfires, and David knew that, walked into it, and he chose the better way, right? Even though he would have looked foolish to everybody around him as he walked out into battle with no armor on, even though nobody would understand what was happening in that moment, David had confidence in how God had used him in the past, and he leaned into that, and he knew that he had what was needed in that moment to take out Goliath, right? And we can draw some strength from that, and I think some takeaways to that. I want to go with the tools that God has given me, not the mold of someone else. I remember when I first started teaching, I've been in ministry for like 20 years, right? So I've been teaching in a bunch of different variety of places and spaces for a long time. And when I first started teaching, I used to teach in like smaller rooms, small groups, like 15, 20 people, sometimes 50 or 100 people. But but almost always when I would teach in that setting, I would use a whiteboard, right? And it was always just easy for me. I was like, when I'm trying to make something clear, what I would do is grab some markers and a whiteboard and be like, yeah, see these stick figures? They're pretty awesome, right? And this makes sense, right? And nobody could read my handwriting, but somehow it always worked, right? And so I always used the whiteboard, and then I started to get invited to speak on like these kind of things, like on a Sunday morning, right? This is what a lot of times, if you didn't grow up in church, they call this preaching, right? Where you're standing up and you're talking to a bunch of people. And I remember I started to do that, and my mentor was Jeff Bogue, phenomenal communicator. And I remember thinking, well, I haven't done this a whole lot. I'm going to watch and see how does he do it, right? How does Jeff preach? And Jeff is a super gifted communicator, does a great job. What Jeff would do is he would write out like 5 or 6 pages of notes, basically exactly what he's going to say, and then he just kind of reads through them, and it's super effective and totally works, right? It's awesome. It's amazing. And I was like, okay, I'll do that, right? I'll kind of write out the whole message. I'll get a bunch of pages, and then I'll work through it. I try to do it the first handful of times. It's kind of a train wreck, right? It's kind of a train wreck. What would happen is I would be good for a while, and then I'd get excited, and I'd go off on like a tangent, and then I'd be like, the papers, and I'd come back, and I'd try to find my spot, and then, 30 seconds, I'd be like, in panic mode, trying to find where I was. And then eventually I try to force myself back into this mold. He never put me in the mold. He didn't. I put pressure on myself, and I got to do it the way that he does it, right? And I would come back, and I remember I talked to Jeff after the first couple times, and we were talking about how that went and what we learned, and I was like, man, it feels like if I could just like use the whiteboard, you know what I mean, like on Sunday morning. That I feel like that would be really helpful and natural. And he was like, do it, go for it. You got to realize no one was using a whiteboard, right, at this point. Like no one had ever heard of that. I remember the first time I brought it out, everybody was like, what is this guy doing, you weirdo, right? And the thing is, I don't even know how to make sense of it. It's kind of like the Stones. I know... the conversation makes sense to me if I can draw a little picture around it, right? I don't have that good a handwriting, and my art skills are terrible, right? But I know that you would all fire me if I stopped using the whiteboard, right? It's a real thing. Guys, sometimes this is how it is for you, right? That there's a way, there's an approach that's in there that this is intuitive, and it works, and it makes sense to me, and it might not make sense to other people. Right? The way that you might do something might be a little different. Even what you do might be a little different. You might not take the mold of the people around you and walk in exactly the same kind of default that everybody else has, because there's a uniqueness here that God has placed within you. Look at what actually David himself says this in Psalm 139. It says, for you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. He's talking to God. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. It says, my frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. I just want us to see some things here. Somehow, right, David got a hold of this reality that it was God who knit him together. It was God who made him uniquely. He's going to look at God and say, God, you are the one that crafted me. You are the one that made me who I am. And he's going to be able to say, your works are wonderful. He's not even bragging about himself. He's just saying, God, the stuff you make is amazing. And this is kind of the crazy reality is every single human being on the planet is unique. Right? Every single person is wired differently. Now, there's a bunch of stuff we have in common. Tons of stuff we have in common. right? We all have fallen and fall short of the glory of God. We all need salvation. We all need to be made right with God by faith. That's what Jesus came to do when he came to the planet and lived perfectly, died innocently, and rose from the dead. And yet, somehow, each and every person has to look directly back to the God who made them and seek him to understand a little bit of how they're made. I can't just take how this person's made and say, well, they're good at, God uses them in that way, so I can just take that and plant it on me, and then it'll be fine, right? We try that, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's fine to have role models. It's fine to get started that way, but eventually you're going to find yourself in a place where you're like, but how did God make me? How did God wire me? And here's the reality. God has created you uniquely for a unique purpose. God didn't just create you individually and uniquely because he was bored. He didn't do that because he just wanted you to think you were awesome and to take what he's given you to use for yourself. He's saying, I want to make all of these unique people, and I want to make them in such a way that they kind of have to individually find their wiring and then use that wiring to bring glory to me. Because their lives are made for me. Did you know that today, right? Whether you're here today and you have a relationship with Christ, you've been following Jesus for a long time, you are uniquely wired, and God has put gifts within you by his Spirit. So, some of you, I realize you're here today, and Mom drug you here, and it was part of Mother's Day gift, and thanks for being here, right, for showing up. You're awesome for doing that. Listen, no matter what your background is, I didn't grow up in church, so if that's your background, I get it. God has created you in his image. He's made you for a purpose, and your life is not just about existing here. It's not about just jumping from one pleasurable moment to the next. It's not about just surviving till retirement or surviving till vacation or getting to the next milestone, graduation, the end of the semester, it's not about that. Those things are fine. They're fine to enjoy. They're part of life. But at a big picture level, why you're on the planet with the unique wiring and ability that you have is because there's a God who made you, who loves you, and he's saying, what I want you to do is I sent my son to die for you, and what I want you to do is I want you to come to life. I want you to wake up to who I've made you to be, and I want you to put into practice, and often there's a fear to this reality, right? I want you to look at the powerful way that I've made you, and I want you to own it, and I want you to do it for me. That's what David did. Here's the thing. There's at least one deep, burning passion within you, down in there, in deep into your heart, right? And it's underneath it's underneath kind of the desire just to avoid pain or to have pleasure or just to get through, or it's underneath kind of our normal desires of life. Everybody wants to go have lunch. Everybody wants to have enough money to live and do what we want. Down deep underneath there, though, there are desires to impact and to make a difference in an eternal way. There's something down in your heart and mind that you dream of. Some of you dream of making a massive impact and making your family different. Some of you moms in the room, you dream of changing, having a legacy that is honoring to God and having your kids live in such a way that bring honor and glory to him, that there's a deep desire down in there. So some of us dream of helping children to have a worldview that's built on truth, and you think, man, if I could serve children in that way, and you maybe you invest yourself into Power Kids. Some of you have dreams of, if I could sing and bring glory to God and be on a worship team or play an instrument, but I'm terrified, I would never do that. Some of you dream of, man, if I could be a part of of a church plant and then see a new area reached. I remember dreaming that way. So some of you would think, man, if addicts could find freedom and I could be a part of seeing that happen. See, not everybody dreams about the stuff that you dream about. Not everybody imagines what you imagine. There's uniqueness to it. And I would argue that the God of the universe burned that stuff down in there deep within you. Here's the thing. The scariest thing in your life is probably not what you'll lose. It's owning and admitting and grabbing hold of the uniqueness that God has given you. Because as soon as we start to admit that and look at it, it terrifies us and we run away. We've been told our whole lives all kinds of crazy stuff. You'll never amount to anything. You'll never do, you're not worthy of it. All these things that have shown up in our story. And when we start to look at the unique passions or unique ways that God might use our lives, frankly, it's terrifying to us. What if I fail? What if people make fun of me? Well, what if it doesn't work? What if it does work? What if it changes? What if it makes everybody uncomfortable when the thing I want to do it actually takes place? What will people say? They'll think I'm self-righteous. Right? All this starts to play out when I start to own the kind of the uniqueness that God has placed within me and start to move it towards God's glory. And so what we'll do is we'll force ourselves often into somebody else's mold. Or we'll let other people put us into a mold. And we'll allow those passions and those wirings and those God-given desires to be squashed and squeezed out and pressed away. And God will look and say, I want you to wake that stuff up. Wake it up. Right? And for the moms in the room, moms, often the reality is you see that stuff early and most in your kids because you know them better than anybody else. And you see the wonder of them. When you hear a verse like Psalm 139, they're fearfully and wonderfully made, you experience that at a different level because you saw a child and you were a witness to their life, and you saw these passions emerge and skills and abilities and the way they see and what they tend to do and what makes sense to them, and you look and say, man, if God could get a hold of that child and be used for God's kingdom, it would be incredible. And you fan into flame that deep set of passions and wirings that maybe only the Lord sees fully, but you get a glimpse in uniquely as a mother. God would look at us and say, what I want you to do is I want you to grab hold of what I have put within you, right? I want you to move forward with what God has put in your hands. What has God given to you? What set of passions, what set of skills and abilities has God given to you? I remember just over the years watching God use all kinds of people in all kinds of ways. I've watched God work with a single woman to say, I have a dream of adopting. Do you think God could use me in that way? Of fostering and adopting. I know it doesn't make sense. I don't know if I could do it, but what do you think? And I watched how she took a step of faith and God used her powerfully in many children's lives and inspired many others. I've watched students look and say, what if I gave myself to reaching my teammates on a sports team? I might not go to youth group as much, but I want to reach and impact the students in my life and help them to know Jesus? Could God use me there? Well, what if God, there's a story that happened at one of our campuses where somebody said, man, I love video games. What if we got a whole bunch of gamers together and we shared the gospel, but we just played games all night and used the church and filled it up with a bunch? I was like, I don't even know if that's possible. But right, it happened. There was 80 people in this massive video game. I don't even know what's going on, right? I don't even know how to talk about it. I barely play video games at all, right? But God uses all kinds of people in all kinds of ways. It doesn't have to be traditional or conventional, or it can be. It doesn't have to be sexy or exciting, or it can be. It's about looking and saying, God, how have you used me? How have you wired me? And maybe this way that you want to give glory to God is through breaking the cycles in your family. Taking the health of your family culture further in honoring your parents by moving it closer to how God would envision it. They gave so much to get you here, and can you take it another couple steps further? It might look like raising a Christ-centered family, or having a God-centered marriage, or walking in singleness with integrity. I want to look at what God has put into my hands and move towards it. But here's the thing, guys. I want to look and say, hey, I can't wear the armor. I got to pick up the stones. Okay? What does it look like to pick up the stones in your life? To use those and to use them for the things of God. So, Ryan, what do we do with all this, man? Like, how do we walk away with a conversation around this? Here's the first step. Right? If I'm going to begin to be used by God in this way, here's where you might start. Step one is I got to start to see it. I got to start to see it. One of the hardest things to see is the uniqueness in the gifting and the wiring that God has given to you, because it's just normal to you. It's just all you've known. You think everybody thinks that way. You think everybody can do what you can do. Right? It's hard to see in yourselves, in ourselves, what God has put within us because it feels normal to us. It's always been there. So sometimes what you got to do is begin to explore it, begin to let other people point it out in your life, right? So when other people look at you and they say, man, you are, I'll give some examples, you are a constant encouragement. Do you know, when I'm around you, I always walk away feeling encouraged. When you seem to always reach out and text me at the right time, and God uses you in that way. You seem to always want to pray for me. Thank you for praying. When you say something, it's like things make sense. You seem to have a faith that helps me believe. It's almost like I need to borrow your faith, and it helps me to have greater faith. When we begin to look and see the ways that God has wired us or gifted us, the things that come natural, I want to begin to see it. It's not arrogant. It's recognizing that there's a God who put that stuff in me. It's not about you. Right? It's not about you. They're not for you. They're for Him. And so when I begin to see that and admit it and own it, I can start to look to the next piece, right, is really to put it into ownership. How do I then own it? I don't want to just have it in my head that God has wired me this way or there's this passion. I want to start to take ownership of it. This is what David did. David owned. And guys, look at the audacity that he had. I mean, if you, at face value, if you just look at his story, you're like, this guy is crazy. He shows up and just assumes that he can do this. That seems so arrogant. We'll talk more about how that was received by his peers next week. Right? Don't miss that conversation. The audacity to move into that place, somehow he forgets all that, and he owns his role and knows that God can use him. How do we do that in our lives more and more? Can I begin to take ownership of it? Here's the next one. I want to celebrate it in others. I want to celebrate it in others. When we look at each other friends, spouses, children, people you go to church with. Well, what if you just became part of how God used you is you helped other people to see and to own what God had put in them? And what if you celebrated that? Instead of feeling threatened by it, instead of comparing ourselves to each other, instead of feeling the need to control it or minimize it or put somebody into our mold, we looked and we began to celebrate how God has made the other person. Man, I struggled with this massive early in my marriage. I just because I didn't have a background in faith, I just assumed that the way that I did life was like I survived a bunch of things. I would have looked and said, this is the only way that I know how to survive life, so it's probably the only way to do it. So when somebody would come along and they would do things differently, I would be like, hey, come over here and use my way, rather than being able to see that other people have other ways and other views, and they can do the exact same purpose of glorifying God, but that they can do it in a different way, right? And I had to learn, how do I accept somebody who does things super different than me? They don't have to be wired in my uniqueness. They're wired in theirs. And that is better, and that's what God wanted, and I want to set that free, and I want to fan that into flame. Huge. You want to be a great friend or a great spouse or a great parent or a great child? Celebrate and see the wonder of the people around you and say it. Tell them. Call it out. Encourage them. Think about how good it feels when somebody recognizes that in you, and do that for one another. Here's the final one. Surrender it. Surrender it. What I want to look at is that God has given us these things, these gifts and passions and talents, sometimes even weaknesses and stories. And I want to look and say, God, this is for you. It's not for me. My life is for you. It's going to be used for your kingdom. And I want to offer it back to you as a thank you for making me and sending your son to die for me. I'm going to take the uniqueness, even if it causes me to face terror. When I look at the uniqueness of how you've made me, I want to offer this back to you, even if it takes me into places that are scary. If I do that, what will all of those questions are less important than the question of, am I moving towards the things of God? Am I doing this for his glory and for his name? Somehow, this is what David was able to do. He forgot all the rest. He owned his part, and he moved into slaying kind of the giant, the fear in his life. And I think we can do the same. Right, as the band comes out, guys, would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me? Wrestle this through here together. Father, we look at the reality of your work. Lord, you're the one that made us. You're the one that crafted us and molded us and placed us in the families that we were born into. Today we praise you for our moms who can call that out and fan that into flame. God, I pray that you would give each and every one of us courage to literally just be who you made us to be. Not even for our own fulfillment, Lord, but for your glory. Lord, that you would raise up a generation of people that are consumed with passion for you and use everything we have to point to you, to say thank you to you, and to point others to how you work in our lives. Lord, would you help us with that? Would you help us to believe you love us and you made us for yourself? Meet us here, even now.